And now on your FM dial at 95.7. Hit that preset. Welcome in on a Monday morning. We are happy to say hello and good morning to David Soffer. He was a candidate for House of Representatives in Johnson County last year. He has plenty of friends and family in Israel. David, good morning. Thanks for being here. Before we get to some of what we're going to talk about here, it's been about a week since we spoke, and take us through what some of those conversations have been like with friends and family back in Israel the last few days.
Sure thing. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate the opportunity to join you again. Conversation has been very good. Again, a lot of them are in positive spirits. A lot of folks are being called up to the military. I think we've got about 500,000 reservists in the state of Israel right now reporting to military service. But there's a lot of national pride in Israel. There's a lot of folks that are gearing our military up for what amounts to be a likely ground invasion of Gaza at some point. We're also protecting the northern border with respect to Hezbollah and Lebanon. So there's a lot of course, concern with respect to going to war, but the folks are upbeat as much as possible as you could be after a horrible terroristic attack just a little over a week ago. But people are very, very prideful in the fact that we're ready to gear up and, again, fight for our right to exist.
All right, so that's all part of what we're seeing here, as Fox News does have that headline as well, that a ground invasion appears imminent. So locally, you saw, as many did, some of the protests on behalf of Palestine that was taking place on the plaza over the weekend. Before we get to any response to it in terms of, how you're going to respond to this as a Jewish people in Kansas City and how the media is handling this, what did you see over the weekend, and what would you say in response to some of those protests that were taking place on Saturday?
Sure. So I'll take that in two parts. First, from our end, from our community, what we did is certainly the day of rest, day of Sabbath, every Friday night to Saturday night. So for us, obviously, a lot of folks gathered in synagogue. We did have an increased police presence, as you might imagine, but from our end, we did quite a bit of prayer, got together as a community, certainly engaged, as far as a community and being able to really kind of rally around the positive and trying to pray to God to hopefully, intervene in this circumstance. But also on Sunday, we had a Jewish Culture Fest. So we planned it every couple of years. Jewish Federation, Greater Kansas City did it at the Jewish Community Center. We had thousands of attendees. We had elected officials. We had others that were able to join us and really just celebrate Jewish culture. And it was so great to see everybody together at a time where, again, so many of us are still hurting, trying to figure out, how to mentally and emotionally deal with this. So on that end, it was great to see so many people celebrating Jewish culture, standing up, for Israel, standing up for the Jewish right to exist, because that's unfortunately what we're seeing. And so, with respect to some of these protests, when you look at some of the protests that are happening both locally and nationally, what you're seeing is folks that certainly, again, I mean, if you're upset about the fact that civilians are dying in Gaza, I get it. If you're upset about the fact that Israel has a right to exist, I mean, I think that's kind of where we start getting into the fact that you're supporting a terrorist organization trying to destroy a country, trying to destroy the Jewish religion, trying to destroy Jews in general. So if you looked at some of these protests, what you saw, there's videos out there. There was a protest in Los Angeles that somebody grabbed an Israeli flag, started, you had tens of people stomping on it, and then the second they got filmed, they're like, hide the camera, hide the camera. You had folks, plenty of these protests that were shouting jihad, right? Jihad is the Muslim word for war, for holy war, for declaring a war on Jewish people, killing Jewish people. So I think you're seeing some folks, again, that certainly have a different interest at play. It's not just standing up for the rights of people. It's also the fact that they very much want to kill Jewish people. They want to eliminate Jewish people. They want to eliminate the state of Israel. And that's what we're fighting against. So from what we're doing on our end, we're going to keep blasting on social media every time we find hypocrites. We're going to keep talking to folks outside of our community to educate. We're going to keep making sure we talk to higher education, talk to our K-12 systems, talk to other community leaders to make sure the education component of what is anti-Semitism, how to spot it, how to put an end to it, is so incredibly important. While you have a right to free speech, there's also consequences to that free speech. And that's what we're making sure we hold up on our end, is making sure that if you're going to shout hate speech, we're going to find you and we're going to out you. And it's important the world knows that you're for, if you're for the elimination of Jewish people, people need to know who you are.
David Soffer's on KCMO Talk Radio. What are some of those social media accounts that people can follow and find?
Gosh, there's so many good ones. Certainly, there's the IDF does a really great job as far as making sure, kind of educating folks on what's going on in Israel, who to be able to what's going on with respect to the war and all of that. There's another guy who's really good that's a friend of mine, Hillel Fold. I think it's at HILZFULD. He had a brother that was killed in a terrorist attack a couple of years ago. He's a great friend. He's a good one as far as keeping track of everything that's going on in Israel. Certainly, Israeli government's a good one as far as being able to see what's going on. And I'm sure I could provide you a list of others that just are not immediately off the top of my head.
Those are some good ones. Those are definitely some good ones. So
Bethany Mandel's another really good one.
Oh, yes.
She's a great friend. Yes, she does a lot of really good updating as far as what's going on. I'm happy to always provide the ones that are government-based, but I think it's also important to talk to, hear from ones that have family in Israel, that are in Israel, that just from a whole other, civilian and human perspective. I think it's incredibly important.
I agree. David Soffer, he ran for House of Representatives here in Johnson County last year. He joins us on KCMO, work for the Collier and Kelly administrations as well. Obviously, deep ties to Israel and the Jewish community here in Kansas City. I want to play for you. I know this isn't going to be a surprise, but some of the media clips that took place from the Plaza rally over the weekend and some of what was being said down there, specifically by this individual, Fatima Mohammadi. She is with Al Hadaf KC. I'll play this from KCTV5 and then get your response, David.
People are suffocating. They are in the worst of situations, in the worst of conditions, and they're constantly then bombarded by these types of military attacks.
That's why Fatima Mohammadi, the community organizer with Al Hadaf KC, says they're standing for those who can't.
What's happening on the ground is that people are being slaughtered and that they are civilians who are being slaughtered, most of which are women and children.
She says this is a global human rights issue and they're not trying to get into politics, but to simply protest the ongoing 75-year occupation of Palestine.
I want them to know that the situation is not nearly as complicated as they may think that it is. If they're stepping into it and they're confused, but they don't really know which side, there are no sides in human rights.
As for Oda, he's waiting to hear back from his family and calling for peace.
David Soffer, how would you respond to Fatima Mohammadi?
Yeah, I agree. There are no two sides to human rights, but let's talk about this for a second. So number one, there's this continued spreading that Israel occupies Gaza. Israel provided Gaza to the Palestinian people in 2005, and they elected Hamas as their leader. They chose their leadership knowing full well what Hamas stands for. They know full well what the issues are. That is who they decided should lead Gaza. That was not a decision by the Israelis. So we do not occupy Gaza. Think about the fact that if we occupied Gaza, how does Hamas get all of these weapons, all of these rockets? How are they able to take in this military exercise? We do not occupy Gaza, and I think that's a critical important. But I think there's also other items to this that are also important to note. If you Google, let's say, Hamas rockets in schools, you will find multiple UN findings. And keep in mind, UN is no friend to Israel. They will show you that there are multiple findings where Hamas launches rockets in schools, they store rockets in schools, they store rockets in hospitals. This is what we're up against. We're dealing with a government, and to be honest with you, a terroristic organization that continues to want to fire on Israeli people from civilian buildings. We have no choice. Israel has no choice in how it acts as far as, again, if you're going to launch rockets out of schools and hospitals, guess what? We're going to have to take out those schools and hospitals because that's where you're choosing to launch your operations from. We have a right to defend ourselves. We have a right to be able to say we are not going to tolerate rockets being launched. And so that's why, unfortunately, you're seeing sometimes where buildings are being targeted that are schools and hospitals. With that being said, Israel also does a fabulous job at making sure folks are aware. They will drop leaflets hours before to tell you to get out of the building. They will then drop a simple, knock, what they call military-wise, where it's a small, it gets hit on the ceiling of the building, and it's thunderous, letting you know, hey, a bomb's about to be dropped. In 10 minutes, you guys need to evacuate. The only country in the world that continues to tell civilians when we're going to attack and to escape. And so from that sense, we continue to do everything we possibly can from the state of Israel's perspective in making sure that we do not harm civilians. In fact, going even further, the entire north strip of Gaza has been told to go south before the military excursion occurs up north with respect to Israel going on the ground. They've told folks for days to get out of Gaza, from the north part of Gaza, and go south. This is the only country I know of that is willing to do that, to tell civilians to get out. And then, of course, what we've seen, the Egyptians, and I think this is another important piece for your listeners, Gaza is also bordered by the country of Egypt. Israel is not the only country where residents, can get out of. They can easily go through Egypt if Egypt would open the border. Until today, Egypt refused to open the border. In fact, their president over the weekend commented and said it was important for Gazans to stay in Gaza in order to fight for their land. Meanwhile, the state of Israel has no problem evacuating its residents when need be in order to save lives. And so I think it's really important for us to, what Fatima said, I think it is really important for us to educate people. I think it's really important for people to understand what the situation is and the fact that Israel is desperately trying to save civilian lives in Gaza, but unfortunately Hamas has no interest. They want to use them as a shield in order to help their terroristic cause, and I think that's incredibly unfortunate. And maybe it's time Gaza gets new leadership, and that's what Israel's trying to do.
David Soffer, always great to have on KCMO Talk Radio, former Kansas House Representative candidate, and we appreciate you coming on, David. Well done.
Thank you so much, Pete. Really appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Great insight there. Appreciate him coming on.